Hi, this is Marila from Peace Matters, a podcast on contemporary geopolitics and international relations. Our topic today is the climate crisis. Does it unite or divide the world? Why do we need climate justice? And how is conflict and climate change connected? We also speak about environmental peace building and how green transition can be implemented in a more sustainable way. My guests are Sophia Stanger, focal point for environmental peace building at Austrian Center for Peace, and Sabrina Kaschowitz, senior researcher at Friedrich Ebert Foundation's Regional Office for Cooperation and Peace in Europe. So we're talking about environment and the climate crisis today, right? And I want to start with a question to you, Sabrina, which concerns this very widespread idea. When we're speaking about environment in foreign policy circles, we're talking about environment as an aspect of security. And the logic of this is basically that all nation states need their environment in good shape because this is important for our national interest, right? But if we think now in terms of the global political environment, which is very much characterized by competition, and in Europe we very much feel this switch to power politics, right? From all those narratives of cooperation that we used to hear maybe some years ago, right? So if we're speaking about environment as a security asset, doesn't it become counterproductive in terms of fighting the climate crisis? Because nation states might tend to then use it more as a weapon, as a tool, as an asset against the others instead of actually cooperating. Do you feel I'm getting somewhere, or is it completely wrong understanding?
Well, it depends. I don't think it has to be necessarily counterproductive. It depends on how you define security, right? Like if it's this traditional state-centered hard security or human security that focuses on the well-being of the people. And we all know that economic inequalities rise the potential of social-political instability, and the climate change, of course, exacerbates. There is no doubt economic inequalities within one country between different groups and social classes, but also between countries. So for me, and that's how I think climate security should be shaped, should be seen. It is climate justice. It is climate justice that we have to approach because, as we know, climate change has no borders, and we share only one sky, only one atmosphere. And when climate change exacerbates existing inequalities, then these existing inequalities also leads to certain countries and disadvantaged countries and groups also being less capable of dealing with the impacts of climate change. And this then in the end has consequences for all countries, also for more stable countries like us, for example. But yeah, we have seen recently a weaponization, let's say, or securitization of climate change, where supply chains have been securitized, or also the supply chain and so on. Unfortunately, but this will not lead us anywhere, unfortunately.
Right, so it's all about our approach. And as far as I understand, Sophia, you're working with climate change and the climate crisis from a little bit different perspective, which is called environmental peace building. So if you can maybe say a couple of words to that, how does it change our approach to this topic?
Sure, and yes, I actually like that you start with this critical question already about climate, environment and security, because I definitely see also what you've just said, that there is also a benefit, saying it's important for our security, because it does rise up the political agenda. So we can say it can be strategic, but it can also narrow things down, because not everyone has a broad framing of security, as you said, of human security, but more a narrow understanding. And if we frame a problem in a particular way, we also frame our solutions in particular ways. And maybe it's not only about security solutions, but way broader, about our whole society, actually. And so what we at the Austrian Center for Peace and also many other organizations and stakeholders do is to frame it as environmental peace building. It puts peace more at the center, and also the peace building more the processes towards an environmental and climate just future. And it's really, environmental peace building is really about the analysis of how do climate, environment, security, and peace intersect. How does the one influence the other, and vice versa? And also it asks the question, how can we really build sustainable social and ecological systems, which are not in conflict with each other, but together? And I think that's sometimes something we forget. When I do, for instance, a workshop or a training, I sometimes ask participants, close your eyes and imagine nature. And what do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear? And all kind of different pictures come up. And for instance, for myself, I always think about the mountains because I just love hiking.
Typical Austrian.
Yeah, I'm proper Austrian, exactly. But never, I think, so far, anyone has said a human body or a human heart. And I think we all think about plants and animals, and we tend to forget that we are nature as well, and that an ecological and a social system are actually not separated, although we think, should we do something for the human beings or should we do something for the climate? And I think that's a big mistake, and it's actually a very recent mistake because many other societies don't do it. So environmental peace building really tries to close that gap again, and it also sees the risks of the climate crisis and environmental degradation, but also sees conflict as an opportunity. And I think many who come from a conflict transformation perspective know that. We think it's not about just avoiding conflicts and harmonizing everything, although it's quite temptative sometimes to do so. But it's also about to say, okay, maybe there's an opportunity, there is a conflict, there is a tension, and it has to be visible before we can work with it, before we can transform it.
Wow, very holistic perspective on things. I really like it. Actually, when I was preparing for this discussion, I checked a little bit what kind of definitions environmental peace building have, and also found different approaches of how people see it. And some people interpret it as another way of characterizing resource-based conflict. So again, it's this competition and conflict logic. Then someone else is speaking about environmental cooperation being a tool for creating peace, right? So maybe can you give us a couple of examples of how it can look, environmental peace building in practice, basically?
Yes, so you've mentioned natural resources. I think this is really something where this field has its origin. So we can think, for instance, about water or land. So if you have a river, for instance, it flows through different countries, and you have to share the water. And you have to share the water between countries, between communities, between different sectors, let's say agriculture, industry, private households, and so on. And this is an example, let's say, like river basin cooperation that has been there longer than the term environmental peace building, but we can still see it under that lens. So I think there is 2/3 of all shared waters in the world are managed in a way that there are cooperative agreements, which is very interesting because often we say, the next wars will be over water, but we can also say, wow, there's so much cooperation actually over water. And there is many examples. We have the Danube. There's a lot of river cooperation at the Danube, but at all continents. And one example that I always find very interesting is the Senegal River, because the Senegal River flows through different countries like Mali, Mauritania, Senegal, Guinea. And since the 70s, there is a really river cooperation, a governance body. And so they discuss and come together, how do they share their water, how do they handle it, how can they also create power and electricity. And even when the tensions have been quite high between those countries in other political issues, there was always a line of conversation. And I think that's the second aspect you have mentioned, using environmental cooperation as a tool for conflict resolution. So the idea is that, let's discuss about environmental topics first, because maybe it's not as much tension as it's maybe about weapons or something else, or about some identity or religious reasons. But let's start about discussing about the river, and then let's take it to another level. Although, I like the idea, and I think it can work. At the same time, I think now we are in such a time of climate crisis that's a bit maybe downgraded to say, okay, it's a nice tool, let's talk about the trees and the rivers and the lakes, and then, let's really get to the hard issues of weapon and whatever. So I think, it has different sides. But I think river basin cooperation is some quite basic and interesting examples. You have also heard of settler conflicts around land, also very topical at the moment, I would say, because there is, desertification, droughts.
Right.
And
this is actually a very good point to ask my next question, because you already mentioned, Sabrina, climate injustice or climate justice, and this concept is about rectifying the historical injustices of industrialized nations that actually used much longer the resources of the earth to get the development to the level of development where they are right now. But the consequences of that are mostly experienced in the countries that are not that developed or that are not that industrialized. All the droughts that Sophia mentioned, this is happening in the Middle East and Africa, Asia, and so on. And so my question would be, how do we deal with that? How does this climate justice work? What are the actual policy tools or legal tools that can bring this justice to those nations and people, of course?
As you mentioned natural resources before, I wanted to build up shortly on what I said before, that climate change has no borders. I wanted to say that even if we didn't share the same atmosphere, and if climate change had borders, and we would be a perfect island of carbon emissions-free land, then we would still need cooperation from the countries in the rest of the world because of natural resources, actually, because most of the raw materials we need to have a carbon-free emission economy, the way we build it up, the way we have it today, we don't have them. We need to import them. And I want to give an example here that is maybe less talked about, I feel. And this is phosphorus. Phosphorus is a mineral that is essential for food production, and it is almost not available in whole Europe, so we have to import it. It is abundant for now, but we have to import it. It doesn't grow, and there is no substitute at the moment. There is no substitute, so we have to import it. Otherwise, we don't have food security. So this is one example of how cooperation would also make up for our own survival. But what we see at the moment is exactly what you say, that we try to build up our carbon emission-free economy, but on the expense of other countries, because we outsource our production into other countries and then say, hey, we are so much decarbonized. And at the same time, for green technology, as we talk about when it comes to green growth, what is the current model of how we try or how we think we can solve climate change, depends very heavily on raw materials that we also have to extract somewhere. But even if I don't talk now about raw materials, even when it comes to renewable energies, we actually build on neocolonial exploitation at the moment within the European Union. For example, we build renewable energies infrastructure in other countries, but we incentivize private companies to do it, and we do it for export. For example, there are agreements between Germany and Morocco and so on, especially for green hydrogen. So this deprives countries somewhere else of their local ownership. They already have higher emissions because we outsource production, and we even take the renewables resources away from them. So this is not how it should be. And even if, and that now I come to what we could do, even if it would work out, even if we're fine with doing it, I don't think it will work for long, because former colonized countries are more and more gaining agency on the international arena, and they don't want to put up with this anymore, with being exploited. So they're having their voice, and they just say stop. And I think Europe has so far failed here to offer them meaningful partnerships on equal footing. Which would also mean that we talk about our colonial past, that we make up for it. And now people think, oh, what this is about, cultural, giving back cultural artifacts or something like that. But this is not what it's about. It's about financial support for loss and damage because of climate change. So I really think that climate change here has also offers an opportunity to make up for the colonial past and correct mistakes in the current system that don't work out the way it does. An example that I have where we missed to do that is the carbon border adjustment mechanism, where we put a price on import products to Europe that reflect the carbon intensity of its production, of that products. And it doesn't account for the fact that many countries were not given the chance to get away from their carbon-intensive economy because they just haven't had the growth yet that we have. And I haven't heard so far that this has even been discussed, like to leverage, like how to mitigate the impact, the trade impact that those countries have from our CBAM, from this mechanism. Or, for example, the Bretton Woods institutions, like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund.
You said already so many things.
Yeah, and so I just want to say there are emergency funds that are allocated in the world according to quota that have been established in 1944, even when most of the colonies weren't even independent yet. So these are systems where we could adjust, where we could make other countries feel that we can have them aboard, because otherwise climate diplomacy won't work.
Right,
so that's what I wanted to say.
This is very interesting because I also wanted to ask you both about the European Union and what the European Union is doing in terms of tackling the climate change. But first I asked about climate injustice or justice, and suddenly it turns out that the European Union is, or when you're saying we, I suppose you refer to the European Union. So it turns out that there are lots of things that could have been done better, but another narrative around the European Union is that it's a leader in terms of tackling the climate change. It has a lot of policies. The Green Deal is a big package of economic incentives and everything possible that actually, motivates us to work with climate. So maybe both of you, if you can say a couple of words of where we stand now in the EU, like what can be done better. I assume there is a lot to do, but also what has been done already, where we are good at maybe.
Yeah. I mean, thank you. You've mentioned many aspects of climate injustice, actually, and many of them concern also the European Union. And I think, well, it's not an easy answer to say whether the European Union is a champion of climate justice and greening the economy and so on or not. And I think it really depends on how do we analyze it. What kind of perspective do we take? And you've already indicated that, of course, we can say how much CO2 emissions, for instance, are produced in the European Union. We can also take the perspective, how much CO2 emissions do we consume? And that's two different pictures. Because we can say, well, we really try to green our economy within Europe, but then if you import a lot of products that we consume on an everyday basis, and they are produced under very different circumstances, of course it's different. And I think I can see the economical problem there, because you want to make stricter rules, because that's actually what you can govern within the European Union. That's where you can really make hard laws. Otherwise, it's maybe global agreements, and we all know very often some countries sign them, but there is no consequences and no sanctions. So then we can say, then we push all the dirty industries to other countries, to other continents. At the same time, if we don't do the policies for ourselves, then it's not really authentic what we are preaching. And I think, the Green Deal is really, really interesting, and it has very good aspects. And at the same time, we are kind of in this loop of, we don't want anything to change, but at the same time, we talk about green transition. We want green growth, although we don't really know yet how that should work. Okay, we want to decouple from resources, but actually it hasn't worked as we want it to work now, or we then need to import other things. And I think, human beings are very contradictory. We know that from our own behaviors, and our institutions are as well.
Yeah. This is very interesting that you mentioned green growth exactly in these terms, because again, the whole idea of green transition is based on growth, something that underlines the economic model that we currently, have in our societies. So, and an alternative solution to that would be degrowth, another movement or a concept that some people, I guess mostly left-leaning people, are talking about. And as far as I understand it, it is exactly about that, reducing our footprint, not by, somehow transforming it, but by really reducing it, just doing less, producing less, right? Doing it more efficiently and so on. But it also requires, to my mind, a lot of political sacrifice and, actually sacrifice in everyday life. So my question would be, is it really a politically viable alternative, or is it something just, like a utopia for the dreamers? I don't know.
I mean, when we talk about sacrifices, then I would ask, okay, what are we actually now already ready to sacrifice for the current system as it works, like our mental health, for example, our relationships, or our healthy environment? Like, we compromise a lot actually to keep up the current system. So why does it even have to be such a big deal to go to a different economic model? I don't know if there's something.
I mean, I'm not an economist, so I think it's for me not so easy to say. But looking at it from a peace and conflict perspective, I think, yes, if we talk about these big transformations that we need actually to face the climate crisis, it's really systemic change. And a systemic change, it brings with it conflict. And there will be resistance. And some people don't want to lose the sacrifices. And I would say that's either a very wealthy minority at the top, but not only. I mean, also other people will feel it. We already have rising food prices, for instance. What does it mean? And so I think what the peace and conflict perspective can bring is to ask, how can we have this kind of transition? How can we really be honest? Because what's now happening is, everything says, yes, we need big change, but you don't have to change, right? We need a big transformation and everything will be different, but no one has to change anything, no sacrifice. And I mean, that's not realistic, right? But the question is, how can we maneuver that? How can we really create a change and not, being passively surrounded by change that's just happening? Because change is happening anyways. We are losing so much already, as you said, by the climate crisis, and it will be worse and worse and worse. So the question is, what do we have to lose and what do we have to win? And what kind of tools and peaceful tools can we have to let it be an inclusive process? How can we start participatory processes, maybe, even in our communities? When we say, well, we want to transition on a communal level to renewable energies, where can we put solar panels? Where can we put windcraft and so on? So I think that's we can start at a very low level and at a very high level, and use those tools that we have from peace building and conflict transformation to make it a more inclusive shift.
I actually don't think that the question matters really so much if we are ready to sacrifice anything, because according to the models by the Club of Rome report from 1972, by the way, we have 20 years left until total collapse if we don't, if we continue the way we do. And I don't think this is just some political climate hysteria, because the report was produced so many years ago, so many decades ago. And they also predicted, according to the model, it was predicted that business as usual would look like this in 50 years and so on. And when you compare this to this model that they have to the current data, then actually they're super close. Like, it's a super accurate model. So I would actually believe that if they predict that in 20 years, if we continue like this, there would be anyways no growth anymore. So
so despite the fact that we take some measures and there is a Paris Agreement and all those conferences to decarbonize and so on, still what was reported in 1972, you said, right? It's still...
If we continue like this, because even the Paris Agreement, and it doesn't work the way the way we would want it.
Okay, so why doesn't it work, or how should it work? There is an upcoming summit that is actually going to review the goals and commitments that all the states made in 2015, and the summit is happening in November. What do you expect from it? Where do we stand on decarbonization, on other issues?
I mean, personally, I think that the climate agreement, the Paris Agreement, is great. It really it was really a historical moment, I think, that states came together and they agreed on this, what we always talk about, 2 degree or 1.5 degree aim of reducing our increase of temperature to pre-industrial times. I mean, that was really a big step. And then a second step is, of course, implementing it. And I think we are so dependent on fossil fuels, and our industries are, and so our politicians are, and it's really hard on those conferences to really get things done in terms of, even to say, well, we have to stop with fossil fuels. I mean, that's scientifically proven. But to say that as a political commitment, I mean, it's so hard to get there. And I think it's a big question of power, where does the power lie? And the power lies where the money is very often. And the money is where there's fossil fuels. I mean, that's, of course, very simplified. But I think that's one big problem. At the same time, I think, well, we do have those big conferences. And some people say, why do we even have them? There is no outcomes. Many people fly there with their private jets. Actually, it's just, producing carbon emissions and producing frustration.
Their commitments there cover their footprint of getting to the venue.
Exactly. So it's not really maybe a good investment, but at the same time, I think we still need those platforms. And it's a time of the year where you have a lot of media attention, and still it's a hard process, and it shouldn't be the only processes going on. But I think still it has a value. And last year actually was the first year when there was also a day dedicated to peace and also recovery and relief. And this year will be the second year. And it's really more to the forefront to say, well, climate change actually is a threat multiplier. Climate change is causing conflict. And at the same time also, how there are so many countries that are affected by conflict and are worst hit by the climate crisis. So there's really a correlation there. And at the same time, we know that we need to invest money in those countries for loss and damage, what you have already said. But they're in conflicts, so sometimes it's hard to give money to governments or to organizations in we call it this kind of fragile settings. And I think the peace community has a lot to say about that, about conflict sensitivity, about do no harm, about financing fragile countries and so on. So I think that's a lot of conversations, and I think it's good that they're also taking place at the COP.
Yeah. About the Paris Agreement, I would like to say that, for example, military emissions coming from military operations are excluded from the emissions reporting that every country has to do. So it is voluntary, so people don't have to report on that. It's completely not calculated. But at the COP, because you mentioned that the COP last year was the first time where the emissions of the military and so on was addressed for the first time, and I think it was in the context of Russia's war in Ukraine, and that's already like a first step. I think Ukraine has really been very active on such platforms to raise awareness and to make Russia somehow accountable on international law. On the international arena for the environmental damage that they cause. So this, as you said, platforms are important, and also important as to what I said before about reparations for former colonized countries, so countries that are the most climate vulnerable at the moment. And there has been a loss and damage fund set up last year, but it covers so far 0.2% of the annual loss, of the annual damage that the most fragile countries face when it comes to climate change. So I really hope that this COP there will be more contributions to this fund.
Okay, so something to look forward to. I was thinking, because you already spoke about Ukraine and the environmental damage that comes with the military conflict. I was wondering in general, because this is also a question of justice, maybe not of climate justice, but of justice in terms of, I don't know, international law or whatnot. So all our progress on climate, maybe in the EU, in Europe in general, to my mind, is just crossed out with the damage that is done in Ukraine right now through the military conflict. So we really need to strive in some way, on one hand, right? We really need to strive to end this violence, for the sake of human lives, for the sake of the environment and so on. But at the same time, do we have to do it at all costs? Do we just need to stop right now, or do we also need to take into account the political aspect of this war and the fact that the injustice is also now being done to Ukraine, right? So how do we square this circle? I don't know what does have environmental peace building to offer. I'm really like hopeful about this new perspective.
Well, I would ask, when you ask this question, I think I would ask you back, what does peace mean for you? Because you're really getting back to the core of what does peace mean, and to this kind of old differentiation between negative and positive peace. Is it just the absence of violence in terms of, let's have a ceasefire now? Or is it positive peace in terms of holistic picture of what does it mean to really live in peace and also justice, how you mentioned it, and justice amongst people and justice to the environment. And I think this is not an easy question, and it's not either or perfectly. It would be both at the same time. But I mean, I think we have to address this question in that case really with humility, because it's always easy, to talk about that from a very comfortable seat here in Vienna and not being affected as much. And also taking the environment into account, I think there is a lot of happening in Ukraine that also takes environment into the equation. Like ecocide, for instance, something that's kind of discussed globally, and it's also discussed a lot in Ukraine. I think Ukraine is the first country that has put ecocide in their national war law, which is an interesting development. There is a lot of collection of data. And of course, there's a lot of damage done to the environment because of the war. And at the same time, there is the second aspect of a war delays climate action on a broader level. Because of course, now we talk so much about conflict and armed conflict that maybe tackling the climate crisis is not on the top of our agendas anymore. And we pay money a lot, for wars. Wars are very costly, and then the money is lacking somewhere else. So there are so many different layers, and I think I'm coming back to your question, environmental peace building would say it's not only about stopping violence now, although this should be a very first step, but it's about asking how do we really build sustainable peace in terms of sustainable social and ecological systems.
Yeah, it's not on us to decide. It's on Ukraine to decide what is the best approach. But what we can do is shift our perspective more towards reconstruction after the war, because there are a lot of elements that we have to take care of. Like at the moment, I feel that there is a lot of opportunism by huge investment companies to say, okay, after the war, we're going to build everything up, we're going to invest and so on. And this rebuilding plans at the moment are mostly dependent, like I'm mostly concerned with GDP growth and nothing else. No social justice, no holistic approach. This is also shown by, for example, the International Monetary Fund loans agreement that it makes with Ukraine, where in exchange it mandates for cuts in social spending, for example. So there, our role could be to really use this huge or incentivize Ukraine to use this huge potential to rebuild a more resilient and climate just economy, and not again a very cheaply built fossil fuels dependent economy.
Yeah, interesting. Let me ask you one last question, probably, which keeps me awake at night.
Now I'm curious.
Yes. So it has to do with this major goal under also the Paris Agreement in general, which is decarbonization, or basically shift away from fossil fuels, right? So we're now dependent on fossil fuels in many aspects of our lives. And now we're shifting to green technology, and by that we're actually creating new dependencies, right? So it's not any longer oil and gas, but it's going to be rare earth elements, and other materials available only in some specific parts of the world. So I'm thinking whether one dependency is better than the other. Maybe in some respects, yes, in terms of preventing global heating and so on, but also from this peace-building perspective, or from a geopolitical perspective and international relations, right? It creates new, fault lines, new conflicts, and so on. So how do we manage that? What should we be aware of when going through this green transition?
Yeah, I mean, first, I would say let's not do the same mistakes again that we did with oil and gas, right? So I think we know a lot of like environmental degradation, but also a lot of suffering that came to some people of those countries. And of course, as you said, I think we tend to just shift the dependency from oil and gas to all the critical raw materials we need for our batteries and for our renewable energies and so on. At the same time, so there is this danger of let's just continue it in, like, as you already said, green colonialism maybe. At the same time, I think the world has changed a bit. Countries in the global south are way more confident, and they are, they cooperate with whom they want to cooperate. It's not that we as the West can come and say, okay, let's make a deal. I think those things have really changed. But there is a big risk still also from a conflict perspective, because also in those countries it's not about, only about global north and global south, but it's between rich governments or companies in some countries and suffering of a poorer population in the same countries who don't have a say, or maybe who have to leave their land because of mining and so on and so forth. So I think I'm really also coming back to the growth paradigm all the time, because if we want to shift our economy, but still, there is such a big appetite and hunger for energy as it is now, and it should grow in the future, we need a lot of raw materials. And we have to transport them, we have to mine them, we have to think about human rights, we have to think about environmental protection. So I think it's complicated, and I think we should not only talk about it from an economic perspective, but from a more social and environmental perspective as well. And I think that's not done appropriately yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I unfortunately don't think that many things have changed when it comes to colonialism, because yes, we as European powers, we lost credibility with those countries. They have more agency. But there are other actors, such as Russia, for example, who at the moment are very active in Africa and are expanding, and they actually trade, they offer security and regime survivals to local regimes in exchange of access to raw materials and natural resources, and it actually does work out at the moment. And Russia actually very well builds into this gap that we left by not dealing with our colonial past, and says, it was the time is over where Western colonial powers can do their economic growth, drive their economic growth by exploiting other countries. This is over now. Everyone has their own agency. At the same time, they do the same thing that we did before, and it actually seems to work out if you look at how active Russia in Africa is, but also in Latin America, for example. And this is what I meant before with securitization of climate change, because Russia is not interested in having these materials to be a green economy, to have a green economy, because domestically they still fully count on their fossil fuels dependent, fossil fuels intensive economy, but they have understood that this is an opportunity to have a leverage in geopolitics if they control all the supply chains, and that's what I think why they go into Africa like this, and this is actually very dangerous. And this is what I meant before with us offering meaningful partnerships, because we don't have a hard power, and it's actually good that we don't have it anymore, but we also are losing our soft power, and this is really a problem, because this means that we won't have a lot of leverage to do climate diplomacy.
So what would such a meaningful partnership look like? What does it mean?
Offering a sharing, for example, and not just exploiting and taking it away, or have agreements where we are able to use it, but we would include them in our recycling processes, for example, or we would offer reparations, or offer them funding into their decarbonization projects, for example. But in general, I would say, when coming back to this degrowth perspective, I would say that it's time to think about degrowth, because anyways, as I said, growth will stop at one point, and we have the choice between either having a complete sudden collapse where we are super growth dependent countries that all of a sudden don't have growth, and you know how that looks like, super chaotic, super unstable, or we take now the step-by-step approach of letting go of growth in a very controlled process. and we would all be better off, while at the same time allowing formerly colonized countries to have their green growth for the moment, so they could reach a certain level of welfare, because at the moment for them economic growth directly relates to the well-being of the people, and so allowing them to grow until they have reached a certain level, while we at the same time try to degrow. That would be the solution that I can imagine.
Okay, so I will take it as your wish for the next years that should happen in this climate debate. Sophia, what would be yours?
I say like a more humorous one at the beginning, because I was just thinking when you were talking, we were talking so much about growth. And I was just thinking it would be so nice actually if all those powerful people who talk about economic growth passionately all the time would talk about a different kind of growth passionately, about let's grow trees, let's grow gardens. And actually, I think it would be way more realistic, because we talk about, money systems. And that's actually really weird, we human beings.
Okay, so we should take growth more literally.
Let's take it literally, yes, really. No, and I think for my hope is really, and you said, let's get to partnerships. I think there is really an important step missing, because when you think you have been in dependency and you have been suppressing other people a lot in the past and still doing it, but maybe a bit more hidden, but still at the same time, and then you say, okay, now we are partners. I think there is a step missing, and the step we already talked about is this kind of justice. And justice is a big word. How does it look like? Is it just paying money? And to whom? To governments? What if they are corrupt? But who are we to tell them that they are corrupt? Because, now coming again and telling them how they do their politics is also kind of patronizing. So I think we have to really talk about we have to have this conversation around justice, and justice in its broadest way of social and environmental justice. And I think when we have that, we are ready to take some next steps.
Okay, cheers to that.
Cheers to that.
Thank you so much. It was a super interesting discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was Peace Matters. If you found this episode interesting, please like it, share with your friends, and stay tuned for our future releases.